Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast brought to you by Jointflows. Today I'm joined by Simon Watson. Simon is the founder at R&B Consulting. Welcome to the show, Simon. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Hitesh. Thanks for having me. How are you today?
Yeah, not bad. Most guests don't ask me, so thanks for asking. I am doing well, thank you. I'm doing well. We always like to start off by giving our listeners a little bit of context. Um, so let our listeners know who is Simon, where are you from, how have you got to where you've got to today?
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. Simon Watson, founder of R&B Consulting, and it's really an accumulation of the last 20 years of working in B2B sales and having done pretty much every role there is, from grassroots right the way through to leading teams at CRO level. And being in the trenches, I think teaches you a lot, certainly about resilience and so on. And so a lot of that stuff I bring through to the consulting practice that I've got today. In addition to that, I've been fortunate enough to be through to go through some hockey stick growth. We've been through three successful exits during that time as well, from software businesses, service-based businesses, and really there's a lot of learnings to be gleaned from those experiences, right? And not just from a sales perspective, but from a funding, fundraising, whether it be through PE, whether it be through VC, whether it be through angel, and understanding some of the dynamics that come with that once you've received the money and taken on the investment and the investors. And so today, my practice really is designed to help businesses, whether that be the C-suite or the leadership team, to navigate some of these common challenges that they're probably going through as they grow, as they attempt to grow. Maybe they're on the decline. I work with businesses that are not necessarily growing as quickly as possible, or not growing at all, and putting in the right processes, tools, applications, personnel, potentially investment to help turn those businesses around. So it's a real mix in terms of what I get involved in, but it's all good fun, and it all stems from growth and revenue and ultimately profitability as well.
Oh, amazing. So is there a typical type of company that you're working with at the moment?
Uh, no, interestingly, other than that, they all fall under the B2B bracket. Um, it's a true mix, which is great from my perspective because I spent particularly last sort of 10, 15 years working in marketing based organizations, whether that be SaaS, whether that be MarTech, AdTech. Um, and obviously, goes without saying, having been involved in AI for many years before AI was even really popular, first getting into it from 2015. So it's so answer your question, no, it's kind of a real mix of, you know, marketing based businesses, of course, because that's where a lot of my experience lies. But it's any business, from traditional kind of service based businesses, some law firms, accountancy companies, training businesses. There's a couple of hospitality companies that I've been consulting with as well, right the way through to AI laboratories, dev houses, gosh, supply chain. I mean, I was talking to a business recently that retrofits electric engines or electric bus engines into traditional fossil fuel driven buses. So it's so instead of scrapping the diesel bus, you go in and retrofit an electric engine into the existing carcass of the bus. And obviously they're a B Corp company, and so I mean it's a real mix. It's a real
Yeah.
mix. Yeah, it's good fun. Keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, I bet it does. All right. So with great responsibility, look, with great power comes great responsibility. And obviously, as you're across all of these different sectors, one of the responsibilities that you probably have is to share with us what it is that you're seeing as common challenges across those sectors as well.
Where do you want to start? It's a big, it's a big. There's loads of them. What
Yeah.
what would be? Yeah, where would you want to start? What would
Let's
be the
focus
better?
more on the conversion element of things. So, when people are trying to close revenue, what challenges are you seeing come up frequently?
think when I get drafted in to support businesses on that element, um, what I tend to do is a diagnostic of that whole entire process of how they've ended up getting to the point of negotiating a contract or how they're getting to a point of submitting a proposal which they think fulfills a need. Um, and then maybe getting ghosted, right? Which is a common thing that happens a lot. So when I get drafted in to say, can you help fix our close rate? Probably to put your question in another context. How do we improve the conversion rate of deals being closed? The first thing I do is look at the entire path of how we got there. And I'll tell you one common thing, if I was to strip it all back, a very common thing that I find is that the right questions haven't been asked in the very first conversation that they've had with that prospect. And another common problem is that they treat discovery like a one and done versus a an ongoing iterative process.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I coach on is helping not just reps, but helping organizations to really understand the critical importance of always on discovery and
Mm.
making sure that we're asking the right questions throughout and pressure testing whether or not the solution, the service that we're providing or going to be quoting for is fit for purpose, and meets the need, not just from a operational perspective, but more often from a commercial perspective for that particular client.
Yeah.
Um, so that tends to be a thing that I regularly advise on and put measures in place to improve.
Yeah. And how do you measure that then? Because I agree with you, discovery is an ongoing process. The job of a sales rep for me is be a detective, always try to figure out who needs to be involved, where, you know, what are their actual pains. I'm a big fan of MEDDICC, so I'm always
Mm,
all over that when it comes to any kind of deal management. But how do you mentioned putting processes in place in order to ensure that can happen. How do you
yeah.
ensure ongoing discovery?
I mean, you've sort of stolen the acronym that I was going to lay out. I mean, MEDDICC or MEDDPICC, and there's a few others that are similar. I think MEDDPICC is probably the the poster pin-up child of recent years. But
Yeah.
do you know what it is? Like MEDDPICC is actually very good, and there's instances that with products like, whether it be Gong or others, where they can, it can help to ascertain what's being discussed in certain conversations to feed through into a MEDDPICC scorecard. And I don't necessarily need to go into MEDDPICC in detail now, but I think either having an AI that's going to help you to certainly populate or certainly to indicate whether you're on the right path for completing a MEDDPICC framework is one thing. If you don't have access to that, I would say it's really just scrutinizing um, the, either the hypothesis or the suggestion that this deal is going in the right direction. So at each juncture, it's challenging it's challenging that hypothesis, or it's interrogating the deal from the point of view, from not just from your perspective but from the client's perspective. Like if you were to ask the client the same question, are you going to get a similar answer?
Mm.
So I think, yeah, MEDDPICC is just a very helpful framework in order to do that. And I think
Yeah.
if it's followed strictly and for the appropriate size of deal, it's an absolute game changer for organizations. I mean,
Yeah.
are you with your teams? Are you like for your company? Are you like is MEDDPICC just table stakes? Like this is what we do for every deal, regardless of size.
Yeah, well, I mean, we use Jointflows to sell Jointflows, and part of it is it automates the MEDDPICC scorecard, like you
Okay,
mentioned. So
cool.
not only
Yeah,
does it automate it, but it brings in direct citations from call transcripts, emails, or whatever data source to
yeah,
justify the score that you've been given, identifies a gap against that specific letter, and how it is you can address that gap. What's the plan of action? You've got
yeah.
a 1 out of 3 score on your metric. How do we get that to a 2? And then how do we turn that into a 3? and that plan gets put together. So yeah, it's absolute table stakes. But even prior to this, I was heading up the sales team globally at a Martech company,
Yeah.
and it was same over there. Like we lived and breathed MEDDICC, and it was the way
Here's a
for
question.
from a leadership perspective, it
Yeah.
becomes easier to understand where there's gaps and where there's true momentum within the deals across, especially when you're managing a bigger team across those
Yeah,
deals.
I love it. I mean, I think it's great. But where does where does MedPick not when is MedPick not appropriate in a deal? And I mean that from the point of view of like the size of the deal and the time it takes to like if
Yeah,
because if you genuinely want to run MedPick, like if you're going to go to the nth degree with MedPick, like let's not fool ourselves. There is a certain element of time that is taken, and I know
absolutely.
like products like yours, which we can kind of get into, are really good at streamlining it and reducing that time. But if we're being really critical of every deal, it does take up time, energy, headspace, so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
do you see? And it's just I'm just genuinely interested in your answer. Where like the threshold is from a MedPick playbook being appropriate based on the value of the deal versus not. So is it a 10K deal? Is it a 100K deal? Is it a 1K deal? Like when does MedPick become uneconomical, I guess?
Yeah. So I think for me, I would look at it a little bit more different. I do think that there are, to your point, a lot of tools out there that automate a lot of the analysis of deals now. So I agree. I do think it was a big time spent before, but not necessarily as big anymore. So the question that I more focus on when I speak to people about deal methodologies, whether it's BANT, MEDDICC, Spencer, whatever it is what's appropriate. Now, for me, MEDDICC seems like it's overkill for deals that are more transactional. So
Mm,
if you have, and you're not doing any kind of multi-threading. So if it's like one stakeholder, one or two calls, in and out, done, signed contract. If you're doing medpick on those deals, you're probably doing overkill, right? There's only a
mm,
couple of things that you probably need to do. Are you speaking to the economic buyer? Yes. What's the implicated pain? Yes. And maybe ban you would assume for something like that might be a little bit more appropriate.
mm,
So yeah, for me, it's more around the type of deal versus the size of the deal. Especially now when you have so many competing technologies within a space, you can have something that could be viewed as a complex technology, but doesn't have a complex technology price point because people are
mhm.
competing as well. So for me, it's more around the type of deal it is would determine whether MedPick is appropriate or not. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I do think there's a point at which I guess it makes sense, but we're almost sort of saying the same thing because I mean, transactional deals are one would assume would be sort of lower value as well,
Yeah,
lower in value, not necessarily lower, yeah, lower in value. But yeah, I don't know. I've just found that to do MedPick properly, to really put it to work, um, it require and rightly so, requires the rep to be really on the ball with it and
yeah,
to be really honest with it. I think the moment that they start fudging it and assuming they've got the right answer to the paperwork process, for example,
yeah,
um, and that's the job then of a good manager or a good VP. Again, going back to the point of like pressure testing, it's like
hmm
okay, Bob, you've told me I'm seeing P is completed and you've got a green tick against P. So you know exactly as soon as that contract goes, you know
yeah,
exactly the whole process, the whole flow, who's going to be involved, and the timeline it's going to take for it to come back, do you? And I think hopefully most people would answer yes, but I can guarantee you there'll be a lot of like, well, yeah, well, yeah, it goes to procurement, right? And then
yeah,
it gets, it has to go to the board to be signed off and all this. And it's funny because, when you start to do that, I had one recently last year, perfect example, right? I started installing MedPick
yeah,
into a SaaS business, and they had never used it before. They hadn't even heard of it, believe it or not, which is quite surprising. But we got it in place, and we started, installing it, and we got to one deal, really strategic deal for the company, worth a lot of money, and it would make or break this person's quarter.
Yeah.
And we started interrogating the deal, and I said, "Well, look, what's the paperwork process and so on?" And they started to fill it in. Oh yeah, it's fine. It goes to, like I said, it goes to procurement, and then it's going to go to the board. But my sponsor, Colin, um, we're all on. Like he definitely wants it. Like he signed it all off. It's now just having to go through some of these sort of traditional, like standard hoops to go through. So, but ultimately, it's going to be the board that signs it, and it's their decision is really going to be based on the decision of Colin and the proposal that's going through with it. So he was like, this is golden. So
Yeah.
come October, or so come September, sorry, we're saying to this, and he said to me, okay, this is gonna close now. It's gonna close in October. And I was like, okay, well, I thought it was going to close September, so it's going to close in October. When we started to, and again started to interrogate him on this paper process, and I said, look, you need to just, I need this in writing clearly what the process is once it goes through to, beyond procurement and to the boys. Okay, so he went back, had a conversation with Colin, came back, and he was like, okay, you're right. I was like, what do you mean I'm right? He said, I hadn't quite got this kind of mapped correctly.
Oh
I
no.
said, go on, tell me. He said, yeah. I said, got the steps correct. It goes to procurement. There's going to be a bit of wrangling. They're probably going to squeeze on price, and then it's going to go to the board for final sign off. And Colin told me explicitly that it's October. I said, right. He said, but what we found now is that the board only review contracts once every 3 months, and the next review process is mid-November. So
Oh
my
dear.
contract cannot get even looked at before mid-November. And I was
Right.
like, right, well, on the one hand, like, okay, let's update your pipeline, right? Let's update your forecast because your forecast is inaccurate.
Yeah.
But two, we now know, right? We now know we've got a clear, hard time frame of when this is going to get reviewed. And so, pending any gotchas, which we might not have accounted for, we now know that come end of, we can now forecast accurately, end of November, this one's going to drop, right? So long as you've done
Mm.
your due diligence and all the rest of it. So, and so that's like one example where a good VP, or a good manager is their role is, as I said, I keep using the word interrogate, but it's really to put pressure on the rep to be diligent about what it is they're putting in their forecast and why it's in there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I always say that it should be evidence led. You need to be able to see the evidence as to why they believe the deal is the way they say it is. So keeping on the same topic of things then. So if you see a rep who has a gap in their understanding of the deal, how do you then prepare them to get an understanding of what that gap should be? How do you make sure they're ready to understand what they need to about that deal?
Well, I guess that again comes down to the coaching element, and I try to coach. I try to coach. And this is the difficult thing. It's an easy thing to get wrong, but I try to coach in group scenarios as well as one-to-ones.
Okay.
But using group sessions, sorry, using individual examples in a group session. So it can go badly wrong. Like if you've got, Joey, who's like relatively green, fairly new, and he's not understood the discovery process or he's not understood the framework of MEDDICC, and then you call him out in a group scenario and say, you messed up. You've messed up the process, or you haven't understood who the economic buyer is. You're kind of calling them out and making them feel silly. Like that's not a great use of one-to-many coaching. But what I try to do
Mm,
is try to share the learnings across the team in an appropriate way, so that if Joey's made a mistake, so's Susan and so's whoever, we can kind of pull those together and say, right, we've got a learning opportunity here for us all to kind of like benefit from either the mistakes or benefit from each other's shortcomings. And then
mm,
collectively we'll get better as a team and we'll grow quicker. And I'll tell you why that's a really good tactic, and it needs to be developed. But there'll be people in that in that group, if you've got multiple, if you've got more than or even 5, 10 people in that team, there'll still be people in there that will be too shy to come forward and say they don't understand
Yeah.
something. And by doing it in that environment, they will just learn through osmosis. They won't have to feel like, you know, silly or bad or, inadequate. They can just learn through that group scenario. So that's one thing that works well when it's done well. But as I said,
Mm.
sort of caution, you can, calling out people or calling out certain situations in groups can be dangerous. But yeah, that's kind of how I would do that. And then look, if and the bottom line is if someone really doesn't understand it, then they just need some one-to-one coaching and really kind of take them back to basics of why it exists. I think that's the important thing. It's like why we're doing it. We're not just ticking boxes for ticking boxes' sake. We're helping you to hit quota and ultimately, grow the business. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I feel like what goes hand in hand with a deal methodology like that is ensuring that you're multi-threading within your deal as
mm,
well. So, you know, when I think about how you'd sign a deal maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago versus how you sign a deal now, very, very
yeah,
different, right? Like the amount of validation that your prospect now requires to sign a contract of X value versus what it would have
yeah,
been 10, even 5 years ago is significantly different now. And there's so many more eyes in the appraisal process. How do you
agreed.
ensure? I mean, what kind of advice have you got around that? If I'm a sales rep listening right now and I'm struggling to make sure that I can cast my net wide enough to capture the stakeholders I need in a meaningful way where they're actually involved in the process. How would
Mm.
you recommend going about doing that?
I think the bit how I'd go about that. I'm not sure how I'd go about it because every company's different. But what I would absolutely make sure is that I've mapped the economic buyer, the person that can actually sign the check, and inevitably is going to be the CFO or the finance director. Um, they're going to be the ones that are ultimately holding the purse strings in a lot of these situations. And I think you just have to clearly define the role of the buying team or the decision
Mm,
making unit on the client side. Um, because if you don't do that accurately, you can get pulled very quickly. You can get pulled into more operational led conversations from people that may be using the technology, but don't have the power to swing a decision.
yeah,
And you can kind of get in like demo loops and justification, product justification too easily with people that actually can't sway a decision. I think that my recommendation to anyone listening to this is to get to the money question and to get to the justification from a money perspective as fast as possible because businesses are not going to buy technology because it looks good or it's a fad. They're literally now going to buy this piece of technology because it's gonna save time, which can be translated into money, make more money, or reduce my risk. It's the three basic things of like why any product is bought.
yeah,
And all of those things roll up to money, in the risk side of it. So whatever your product is and however you get there, you need to have a very clear route to ROI and have that mapped, have a hypothesis if you need to go in with something, and then have someone that can validate that hypothesis, validate or populate that ROI calc with actual numbers from their business so that
mm,
when you're meeting that economic buyer, when you're meeting the signatory or the CFO essentially, um, that meeting with the CFO to clarify that this investment that we're asking them to make in us is a valid one.
yeah,
So I think it's getting to that ROI, kind of money conversation as fast and as accurately as possible, having it validated by internal teams, and then being super prepared when and if you get the chance to sit down with the CFO to take them through it and and to rebuttal any kind of response or question that they might have or worry or concern they might have about the deal. Um,
yeah.
That's yeah, that's pretty much it.
No, that makes sense. And what I find works well when it comes to multi-threading is two things. One is when you're engaging with these stakeholders in a meaningful way, make sure you're focusing on what's important to that stakeholder. I see lots of reps get swept up in what's meaningful for one person is meaningful for everybody. You know, you speak to the CFO the same way you speak to your champion, which
Mm.
is not going to work. And then the second thing that I find works really well is team selling. So, you know, if you're working on an enterprise deal, they're not expecting you to be the only person that they see as the face of your company. They're expecting to see your team. So don't be a maverick. Don't go alone. What are your views on those two things? So to break that down a little bit more simply, the
Yeah.
kind of language that you use across different stakeholders, and then involving your wider internal selling team as part of the process as well.
Yeah, it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial to involve your team because you and I, we might know the product fairly well, depending on the level of detail in the product, that you're going to know some things less well. And again, if it's a truly enterprise, multifaceted product, you're not going to know all the products, all the parts of the product particularly well. So I think about this from I want to bring in the best people or best person from within my organization that can talk to that specific point about the product or service way better than me. Like
Yeah.
I can understand it. I can understand the entire business at a relatively high level. And I'm actually, I enjoy going down the rabbit hole and getting more into the weeds from a technical perspective. That's just because of my inner geek. But from a sales leadership perspective, from a sales or running a sales process perspective, you don't need to get into the weeds. You need to keep focused on what the commercial benefit is to the business and allow the the technical, solution architects or the solution engineers or the sales engineers to come in and support you through that process. And those are fancy job titles, and some companies do and don't have those. But those that but those people exist in all of the organizations, whether they're called solution selling or sorry,
Mm,
sales engineers or solution engineers. They 100% exist. Even if you're a 10-person company, there'll be one person in there that just knows the product way better than you and I, and they're comfortable talking to clients. So bringing
yeah.
them in at the right time and as early as it makes sense in the deal process, I'm a huge advocate for. And I remember we did one of the biggest deals that I did in my time at Real Time Agency was with the brand Breitling watches, the timepiece watches. And
Yeah.
when we took on that brief, it was an RFP, and we took on the RFP, and the agency is a full service agency. So just for a bit of context, why this is important. Real Time is a full service digital agency doing everything from SEO, programmatic ad buying, paid search, paid social, affiliates, like you name it. And we were managing at our peak, it was about $250 million worth of marketing budget, right?
Yeah.
Really sophisticated media buying with one of the best in the country. And so for us, fortunately, we got in front of Breitling and we got invited to be part of the RFP. And the RFP came through. It was one of the biggest RFPs I've ever been part of. And I'll keep it short, but they wanted their entire media budget, digital media budget, they wanted to be managed through one agency. Okay. So within that, you've got what they wanted was programmatic, paid search, paid social, and I think we got onto affiliates as well by the end of it. But and then they had a huge um, MMM, media mix modeling part of the component of the RFP. There was tracking involved, like really detailed stuff that requires mathematicians and certainly scientists to be able to respond to some of these questions, right? So immediately I've reviewed this. And so my role now is like, okay, who are the best people to answer these 50 questions in the RFP? Because I don't know them. Yeah, I
Yeah.
could give an answer, right? But it's not the answer that's going to win us the RFP. So it's bringing in the specialists within the company, the specialists from search, the specialists from social. And if you then sort of think replace that scenario with your own company, whoever's listening in whatever product or service you're selling, there'll be tranches of that business that you know less well than other people. So it's your role to bring in the experts to help answer that particular question, whether it be RFP, whether it be just support on a pitch, whether it be to reply to one or two really detailed questions that you've had pushback on, and bring those people in. Because the moment you bring those people in, then the person on the other side who's asked the question can have a meaningful, deep conversation. And there's no risk of them seeing through the fluff. Like they're talking to the
Absolutely.
person that actually knows what they're talking about. And I think, and I'm a massive fan of that. And it becomes a bit of a team event, and you become more of a facilitator and a project manager to make sure all the components come together, to deliver exactly what, the response that is needed in order to win that client over, and give them the confidence that you're the right fit. So yeah, big fan of that, and it's necessary for big complex deals, and the more complex you go, the bigger the organization, the more these solution architects involved, it becomes incredibly fragmented. But certainly in that sweet spot of like 5 to 25 million,
Yeah,
there's a lot of fun to be had there, and a lot of sort of management of different teams and different personalities and expertise within that to win a big deal.
absolutely. Well, Simon, time flies when you're having fun. Believe it or not, we're already reaching the end of the time that we had today, but we do
Yeah,
have a closing tradition on the podcast,
go for it.
which is the previous guest has left you a question to answer. And so that's not a joint flows question. It's come from the guest, not knowing who is going to answer the question. And then once you've answered that, you will then leave a question for the following guest as well, who could be anybody.
Nice, got
So the
it.
question that's been left for you is, if you had to run your entire sales team like a reality TV show, which one would it be? Now, I don't watch much reality TV, so I would have no idea what the answer to this is going to be. And I don't know if you do either, but there's your question.
The I was going to say the best reality TV show I've watched recently is Last One Laughing. I don't know if you've seen
Okay,
that.
I'm not.
It's a reality it's a celebrity comedian show essentially, but it's they're all thrown into a house, and the
Yeah.
goal is they're not allowed to laugh. So they're all trying to make
Ah,
each other laugh, but they're not allowed to laugh. If they laugh, they lose a point. If they lose 2 points, they're out.
yeah.
So I think just for shits and giggles, I would put an entire team into Last One Laughing, and sit back and be the puppet master behind the scenes, kind of setting off little tasks and getting them to do certain things, and to
Yeah,
watch none of them laugh until they're bursting, and then they're out the game. And I think because there's so many great characters in sales, you know loads, I'm sure, but
yeah,
I mean, they're the biggest of the biggest characters, aren't they, in most cases? And not all of
absolutely.
them, but there's some crazy fun characters that I've met, and some of them are my best mates, and even more quiet, shy, and subdued characters have just got this inner child, this inner like
Yeah,
you know comedian sometimes. So yeah, there you go. That would be my answer.
great. I haven't seen the show, but most comedians I know, they like to laugh as well. So I can't imagine they last very long.
It's the best TV program it was on Amazon, but it's the best thing I've watched on TV, full stop, for a long, long time. There's over 6 series.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out. All right.
Cool.
And then the question that you would like to leave for the next guest.
Gosh. Okay, if you had to pick one channel forever to do outbound on, what would it be?
God, that's a good question. I should have asked you that on the podcast. Yeah,
Well, there you go. You can stump one of your next guests with it.
absolutely. Well,
Well, I'll
Simon,
add
thank you.
what would it be and why? I'll just add the why
Yes,
at
the
the end.
ad why is important. Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, look, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode. So
I
thanks for
hope so.
coming and sharing all the knowledge that you have. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks, bye.